2 years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these two ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m. and the kids were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads, when someone knocked on the door. I asked them if someone was supposed to come over, but they both said no. I went over and looked through the peephole in the door and saw some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I couldn't see his face. I was immediately frightened and knew something was wrong, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want the guy to know we were inside. A couple minutes later, I checked through the curtains and saw that he was gone. I didn't want to spook the kids, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just wrote it off in my mind. The moms returned a few hours later. They asked me how everything was, and I told them that the kids were great, but someone had knocked on the door around 8. One of them started freaking out and going through her phone. The other one told me that around that time, someone had been making strange phone calls to them from a blocked number. The caller had disguised their voice and was saying things like, "I can see you through your window." They didn't think it was serious at the time, but in retrospect, they were almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, both still looking worried. I touched base later, and apparently nothing strange happened after that, but I'm really glad I didn't open that door. I was always an anxious kid. I was afraid to be left without my parents, even with my 3 sisters around. I just always had this feeling that something bad was going to happen. Sure enough, one of the scariest nights of my childhood happened when I was around 14 years old and my parents went out with friends for a couple of hours. I had that bad feeling again and had begged my parents not to go. They were used to this by now though, so they told me not to worry like they always did and headed out for the night. I live in a rural area of the United States, and there was one particular restaurant in town that didn't have any cell phone service. Of course, on this night, they were going to that restaurant. Our house is in a rural area as well, and the driveway takes a good few minutes to walk down, but we also had some close neighbors. Across the road, some college kids were having a party. My older sister was babysitting and had a friend over to help her. All 3 of my sisters and her friend were watching the Titanic, and I was playing computer games in the office off the living room. It was peaceful, and I was distracted from my anxiety. Suddenly breaking the silence though, there were blood-curdling screams coming from outside. It sounded like a young woman screaming for help and asking for someone to come outside. She was relentless. My sister, knowing better than to open the door, grabbed all of us and a pellet gun and locked us in the bathroom. The woman continued to scream the most awful, horrific scream you could imagine. We called my parents over and over again, but quickly remembered that they didn't have cell reception. We called 911 instead and told them what was happening, and I knew that my mom would probably be going outside of the restaurant soon to check her phone, but waiting inside that locked bathroom as the screams were closing in on our front door seemed like forever. We sat in silence, listening to her screams amongst the Titanic soundtrack. It was extremely eerie. Soon after, we heard sirens flying down our road. The woman must have heard them too, because the screaming stopped. Our parents arrived home at the same time as the police, who were searching the property all night. They came back the next morning to look in the daylight for blood, tracks, or any sign of struggle, but didn't find anything. I always wonder whether the woman actually needed help, or if it was a trap. We thought maybe she had gotten into trouble at the party down the street, but the logical part of me knows it doesn't make any sense to choose the 4th house down with the longest driveway to seek help, and it especially doesn't make sense to disappear as soon as the police arrive. My parents didn't leave at night for a long time after that, especially without cell phone reception, and I still don't watch the Titanic. This happened ages ago when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13, living in the countryside and babysitting most of the children on my street. One of my neighbors loved to go out on Wednesday night to this Latin dance class at a nearby bar, so I would always babysit for her and knew she'd be back very late. This specific night, the oldest of her 3 children was being very difficult and wouldn't go to sleep. I struggled putting him to bed and was pretty tired afterwards. I studied for math class and around midnight decided to take a nap until their mom came back. Only a few minutes after falling asleep, I heard someone frantically knocking on the door, trying to open it. It was another neighbor with her 2 young children. It was winter and we easily had 3 feet of snow on the ground at the time. The temperature must have been at least -21°C, and the kids only had on their pajamas and unzipped jackets. Their mother was wearing jeans, a wool shirt, and winter boots with no coat. I could see the fear in her eyes as I struggled unlocking the door. I ended up panicking and having her walk around the house to the patio door instead. When she got inside, she quickly told me to bring all the children downstairs, turn off the lights, and not answer the door for anyone. The kids kept asking who their father was going to kill, while she shushed them and assured them that nothing bad was going to happen. Then, she left. Confused and scared, I woke up all the kids and brought them into the playroom in the basement and asked them to play silently. The oldest, who hadn't been asleep long, was asking me what was going on. I did my best to remain calm and told them it was a special occasion where they were allowed to play late with their friends. I calmed down the neighbor kids, telling them that no one was going to die, but in my mind, I knew my time had come. All I could imagine was getting shot while trying to protect the kids. I was trying to figure out how to stay alive, or at least how to keep them safe. I wasn't trying to be a hero, but I knew if it came down to it, I would have to try and protect them. I called 911 and was directed to an answering machine asking which department I needed to be connected to, but I was crying and shaking too much to navigate it correctly. I called my mom instead and quickly told her the situation. She called the cops and ran over to the house to join me. As she got up the driveway, she saw the neighbor's husband walking up the street with a huge axe. My mom ran into the house, locked the door, and cracked open a window. She shouted through the window to ask him what was going on as he approached the house. He demanded that she come outside and confront him, clearly thinking it was his wife. My mom explained that she was just the babysitter's mother. He asked us to give him his wife, but even we didn't know where she was. He argued with my mom, but she remained so stable that she was actually able to calm him down. I still admire her for that night. After about 10 or 15 minutes of arguing, he walked back home, carrying his axe. A few seconds later, his wife knocked on the patio door of the house and came in. She was crying and apologizing to my mother for everything that had happened. She thought her neighbor was going to be home, not the babysitter, and had come over looking for help. A few minutes later, police cars finally arrived. They questioned the wife before turning to ask me and my mother questions as well. The woman I was babysitting for arrived during this, and they interviewed her too. We all agreed that we would go to court if the woman decided to press charges against her husband, but surprisingly, she never did. Apparently, she had just told her husband she was sleeping with her boss in order to get a raise since the family was struggling financially. He got his axe and swore that he would kill the bastard, but she tried to stop him by taking away the kids. I was always afraid of him whenever I saw him around the neighborhood after that, and I was always checking his kids for signs of abuse. They moved about 6 months later, and we moved 2 years later, so I'll never be quite sure how they ended up.